forget you are welcome home, welcome home. I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home. I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home.
Ivory Coast. Yeah. Hey, my best money. Now I don't know name. One mammy, I'm bringing it out of money. Oh, my cash on what I'm Hey, Momo. Number one, more than that. Hey, oh, wait, hey, oh, wait, 800.
Must be a Hello. You already paid. But you know what? I'm in flop. What am I in flop?
Oh, what
I say. Let me see. May I come some natural? Oh.
Okay.
Because of imported pathogens, they will begin to die. Then we'll have a Catholic priest by the name Bartholomew de las Casas, suggesting that they come in for Africans. Naturally, the African is strong. Our bodies can withstand the weather conditions there. Kindly. And the African is good with agriculture, so shift demand here to Africa. Here they started with raid and kidnappings as the mode of capture. Storming towns, they set houses ablaze. As people ran helter-skelter for their lives, they were captured. But the ever-growing demand there would necessitate the partnering with certain African groups. So got to a time he had Africans themselves joining in the hunting, doing the hunting and kidnapping for the Europeans. Africans were captured across West Africa. Wherever they were captured, they were marched on foot, in chains and in shackles, through towns into the castles. Before the castle, they passed through a town called Senmansu. There they took their last bath as enslaved Africans. In that town, they shave off their hair clean, clear their beard, if any. That was to disguise grey. If you brought in elderly persons, you don't fetch better prices. So to hide their grey, they shave them clean, smear them with shea butter for them to look young, fresh, and attractive. And in the castles, they were exchanged for goods like mirror, liquor, gunpowder, tobacco, textiles, ceramics, among other commodities the Europeans traded in. They were taken to the Palava Hall, where they were categorized into domestic and commercial slaves. The domestic slaves were used for chores in the castle, commercial slaves held in the dungeons for shipment. Then to the courtyard for branding. With the branding, they had metals with names or the logos of the companies purchasing the slaves beneath it. They heat them red hot in fire, straight into oil. Men had their marks on their chest, their hands or shoulders. Women on their shoulders or their backs. Some had portions of their ears cut off for easy identification. Once that is done, the men are separated from the women. The men are kept in the male slave dungeon. 100 meters from here is a female slave dungeon to await shipment. In the castle, they spent between a day to 4 months or even more, depending on when you were brought in and the next available shipment. Which is to say, if you are brought in today, shipment is today, the day after you can leave. But if you are brought in today and you missed the last shipment, you'll have to be in here for the next voyage. History says some will leave here partially or permanently blind. Would spend a little over 10 minutes down in the dungeons. Coming back up would feel the impact the sun has on our eyes. So if 10 minutes down here can give us an impact, just imagine those locked down in here for months. Here they were fed twice a day, mainly carbohydrate-rich food to sustain them. Before we start with the guided tour, it is important to know that Africans had our own slavery system before the coming of the Europeans. But what we practiced here was not as inhumane as a transatlantic human trafficking. What we had here was the indentured servitude or the serf system, where a slave could be reintegrated back into the society. Those are the red count because of the sun just in the place. So Africa was a big land devoid of political demarcations. That is to say, we did not have Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and all that until the partitioning of Africa, where Africa was shared like a piece of cake. We lived in smaller groups, families, clans, tribes, and how powerful you were was usually dependent on your size. So we're always at each other's throats fighting to enlarge the groups. With this form of slavery, once you were able to conquer your opponent, you took charge of their lands and used the people as servants. A skilled warrior in a community like that could be reintegrated, elevated in the community as a warlord. A hard-working servant in a community like that could be rewarded with the land and even made to marry into his master's home just to enlarge the groups. But upon contact with the Europeans, they have to start selling them to them for the commodities I mentioned earlier. They would also capitalize on the division we had here in Africa and partner with certain African chiefs, empowering them with superior weapons. You are fighting yourselves, the opponents use their bow arrow spears. You are given gunpowder. Definitely yours is superior to theirs. Fight them, conquer them, and take charge of their land, since that is what you needed, and in exchange, you bring them the captives of war. Of the 3 castles I mentioned here in Ghana, Cape Coast Slave Castle is the only one purposely built for the transatlantic human trafficking. Visiting the Omina Castle or Christian Castle, you see storage rooms or warehouses converted into holding cells, dungeons, once demanding commodities shifted to human beings. But here we enter underground dungeons, we see underground tunnels, among others, because this was purposely architectured for human trafficking, built in the heat of the transatlantic slave trade. So this is a brief introduction. We begin the tour from the male slave dungeon. It is a gentle slope, a bit slippery, so please take your time as we descend so that no one falls. This is the space between the questions. Please take your time. So for us to have a feel of how it was in here, I'll briefly turn off the lights. In here we have the first of 5 chambers of the male slave dungeon. The male slave dungeon was designed to hold between 700 to 1,000 men. So this is the first chamber that was partitioned into 5. In every chamber they kept between 150 to 200 men. That is to say, once all 5 were full, we have between 700 to 1,000 men spread across the 5 chambers. What we see up here would be the only source of light and ventilation for the men and this chamber. And of the 5 chambers, this end was locked. This room was considered to be the room for the aggressive men. So the ones who were too aggressive were locked up in the first chamber. Down here, they did everything down here. They were fed here, they would sleep here, urinate, defecate, everything is done down here. Rain is expected to move through the same openings, washing away the feces and the urine through the trenches you see in the middle, as well as the eggs, right down into the sea. The question is, how many times does it rain in a week? How many times does it rain in a month? Having to be living in their mess, most of them would fall sick, most of them would die. As an enslaved African, once you were found dead in here, your bodies were carried and dumped straight into the sea. That is to say, no enslaved African was given a befitting burial here in the castle. Once you were found dead in here, the bodies were thrown straight into the sea. Getting to read literatures about the trade would hear a little over 12.5 million West Africans were estimated to have survived the trade. I get to go times 3 the numbers we hear pertaining to survival were the casualties. So 12.5 million survived, over 36 million did not. Yet this trade at a point in time became so lucrative that the Europeans themselves began to fight each other, killing each other to take charge of our lands. As the tour progresses, you get to know the land this very castle sits on exchanged hands between 5 different countries. In the year 1974, we had a group of archaeologists from the University of Ghana coming here to excavate this place. It is only then we get to know the initial floors of these dungeons were made of bricks. If you look down, we stand on bricks today. Coming here prior to that, this is what you see, the dark parchment here. And this is exactly what we are going to be walking on from the second chamber right down into the fifth. After test conducted, you'll get to know what we see here, and everything we'll be walking on from the second chamber is solidified or compacted human waste. Which is to say, these are tears, blood, sweat, urine, feces, vomit, sputum, among others, mixed with sand. We see here. When they want to know what this is, they would leave this side intentionally unexcavated, as well as the others. If ever we have doubters amongst our groups, they are permitted to have samples, tested themselves to see if there are traces of human DNA in them. Now, people still come here and they doubt slavery ever existed in the first place. So if you belong to that school of thought, we allow you to get samples, test them yourselves to see if there are traces of human DNA. The first of 5 chambers of the male slave land. Do we have any questions? So from this very end, we'll be moving on to compacted human waste. So here we have the third of the 5 chambers. Right on top of the third chamber was a church, Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. That's the name of the church, SPG, Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. The Church of England, present-day Anglican Church. This is a spy hole that sits right in front of the church. So before they entered the church to pray, to listen to love your neighbor as yourself, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. You see some of the neighbors down here. You hear some part. You can see they are staged before they entered that church to pray. Some of the neighbors were killed in the castle, others were sexually abused. It would interest you to know that for 50 years we have an African ministering to an all-European congregation up in that church, as fellow Africans like himself died right beneath him. So once upon a time we have an African ministering to an all-European congregation there, as his own brothers died right beneath him. I know if you would have any question right now, it will be around that African. My first presentation outside is centered around him. Let's see the last chamber of the Muslim land. Yes.
Yeah, so what do you think? Do you think there being a church on top is just people saying, okay, we're Christians and this is where we walk, so we need to pray? Or is it a cover for...
Well, with that, I will not be the right person to answer. It matters bordering religion. I always say it is very sensitive, and I always choose to not necessarily take sides when it comes to religion. Yes. So, well, you see, funny enough, religion, Christianity in Ghana will begin from the castles. The Catholic Church will begin from the Omina Castle, Anglican Church right on top, Methodist at the courtyard, Presbyterian Church of Ghana at the Sioux Castle. So one would ask, perhaps there are Christians and they need to worship, but then if you would have to situate your place of worship right on top of these atrocities, I always ask this question: what kind of, every time I'm in front of the church, as we move up, I ask this question. So what kind of God were you even going to worship there in the first place, knowing exactly what was lying right beneath you? Because if I were to be a Christian then, anytime I get to the very entrance, you see where this spy hole is situated, right in front of the entrance. If I were to be a Christian then, anytime I get closer, my conscience would drive me back. So that is why I said religion is a very sensitive matter, and I always choose not to, because, yeah.
One more question. So, in that period, do you know if it's the population of foreigners in the coast is not only people in slave trade, but also people just of trade? So maybe they come into church. This is where church is, but those that are running the church then know what is.
So, if I'm to get your question right, you want to know at every point in time, the number of Europeans we had.
Yes.
All right, so with the soldiers, I know they had, at a point in time, they had 150 soldiers in the castle. But with the merchants, to be sincere, I can't tell at every point in time the number of merchants we had in here. All right, let's see the last number of the military. Let's spread out. And here we have the fifth chamber of the male slave dungeon. From this end to that end was an entrance to a tunnel that connected to the door of no return. There the women joined for shipment. This was sealed in the year 1834, supervised by Captain George MacLean to mark the end of the trade in the castle. So there was a law to abolish the trade in the year 1807. There's still trafficking human beings here. So to mark the end of the trade, they have to seal the tunnel. We'll see portions of the tunnel as the tour progresses. To my right, you see some reeds. These reeds are brought in by tourists to pay respect to those that died here. Though their bodies were dumped in the sea, we believe their souls still remain here in the castle. We see a room to my left. If during shipment you are considered 2 weeks sick and not fit for the voyage, you are shackled and so we spent a little over 10 minutes down in the dungeons, coming back up to feel the impact they had in your eyes. So just imagine if 10 minutes can give you an impact. Someone kept in there for months. That explains why some historians believe some left here partially or permanently. Where we stand was the graveyard for the Europeans. I mentioned down there that the enslaved African was thrown in the sea once they were found dead in the castle. This is where they buried the Europeans. In 1996, we would have excavations here as well. After the excavations, they found just 4 marked graves. So our presentation here will be centered on just 4 graves. This one here happens to be the only African buried amongst them here. His name is Philip Kweku. So Philip was a native of the land by the name Kweku Eju, who was born to Obrimpong Kuju, who was a local slave merchant. So Philip's father was one of the Africans who sold Africans to the Europeans. And through the connections his father had with them, he got the chance to study in Great Britain. Philip would read theology in Oxford University. Age 24, he became the first African to be ordained an Anglican priest. The next year, he would return to Gold Coast to serve as a reverend minister here in the castle. So for 50 years, this is that African who will be ministering to an all-European congregation up in this church as his own brothers died right in it. 1816, aged 75, Philip died. But then, before he died, treatment for him in the castle changed. History has it that his allowances were not coming as regular as he used to. Philip would have to move moving out of the castle for commerce. Through that, he introduced the natives as to how to read, write, and speak the English language. The Western form of education in Ghana is attributed to Philip. Just 5 minutes drive from the castle was the first school in Gold Coast in Anna of Philip boys. To some historians, Philip was brainwashed. That explains why an African would stand before an all-European congregation to minister to them, though his brothers died beaten. Though Philip had the skin of an African, up here he fell to Europe. He was taken from Gold Coast just age 11. So to them, they reprogrammed his mind, spending 14 years there. To others, 14 years is too short a time for one to totally and completely forget his roots as an African. I side with them. And indeed, 14 years to me is too short for one to completely forget where he comes from. But the other time I met a group of tourists that told me, see, people travel to Europe and just after 2 years, they behave more European than European themselves. 14 years to them was ample time, judging from the age he was taking. 11, he was still a boy. To me, Philip was conscious. But I was one man against an entire system in here. He could do very little about the happenings here. And second, it is the same trade he had been profiting from right from infancy. It is through the same trade you get a chance to study elsewhere. Who are you to come back to fight against the very system you benefited from? So to me, he was conscious, but then he could do very little about the happenings here in the past.
Of course.
He died aged 75. Let's see the other groups. These are all Europeans. So here we have a British soldier by the name C.B. Whitehead. Whitehead was a lawyer. He became an officer in the British Army. So I mentioned earlier, at a point in time, the trade became so lucrative, the Europeans would begin to fight among themselves. The land this castle sits on exchanged hands 5 different times. The first country to be here was Portugal. Then came Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, and finally Great Britain. Great Britain were the fifth to be here, but we attribute this edifice to them. They inherited the fortified trade post but they couldn't strengthen this. And once they took charge of this land in the year 1664, they stayed with us up until 1960, when Ghana became a republic. Let us believe that in one of the Anglo-Dutch wars, the struggle with the Dutch was shot dead, age 38. Here we have Letitia Elizabeth London. Letitia was the wife of Captain George McLean. She came to Gold Coast to visit her husband. Just after 2 months, she was found dead in her husband's bedroom. 3 things were said about her death. First is when she came, she got to know the husband had an extramarital affair with an African mistress by the name Ellen Banner. So out of jealousy and personality, she poisoned herself. Second says when she came, it was the mistress together with George that would kill her. Because Ellen
No.
Nothing we can afford. Hit me more.
Two actions just linked.
What's in the next?
No.
Okay, here we have the Palava Hall. This served basically as a slave market in the castle. So this is where they will be categorized into domestic and commercial schools. Then they were auctioned. Back then, goods exchanged hands. It was a barter system. Where a full-grown man can be paraded, and some would be mirrored, gunpowder to powder. And it is left to the reader to exchange with his captain what he saw fit, exchanging them. It is in this same hall that housed the 8 native chiefs together with Commander Hill signed a bond of 1844 that would usher Ghana into 113 years colonial rule. So this is where they will sign the bond that would lead us into colonization. Everything in this room has been restored. The only original portions left are the dark ends of the roof. So the dark corners of the roof are the only original portions of the roof. Every other thing in the room has been restored.
So doing sales, trading,
The slave raiders and the merchants. So the raiders bring in the men, we sold the merchants.
So this is a place of worship.
This is the where they put it. I mentioned at the course here that Great Britain were the first to be here. And when they took charge of this land, they would stay from 1664 up until 1960. Let's look up on top of the hill there. We see a wide structure with a brown roof up on top of the hill there. That is Fort William. Britain had 2 watchtowers for the castle. There's William, I'll show you Victoria has moved down. So it has Fort William and Fort Victoria as a security backup for the castle. the 150 soldiers here in the castle, as well as soldiers in these forts. They were to overlook land and sea. Once they saw enemy ships coming from the sea or intruders from the land, in the mornings they used red flags to alert the castle. Afternoons, reflections from mirrors, evening torch. Soldiers here picking up these signals, mount their cannons we see spread around the castle, load them with gunpowder. Pushing in the cannonballs and lights and fire at the back, they shot perforating holes in the incoming ships. That explains why they stayed for that long, because they made sure the place was heavily guarded, heavily fortified. Here at the art shop was the barracks, other guys and 4 of the soldiers. The center part served as a canteen. This end at a point in time would be a prison yard here in Ghana. We still see the coat of arms right in front of the entrance. But it gets to a time people start to agitate. How can they enslave Africans in this building? We hold our ancestors captive in here, and in this same edifice, we hold Ghanaians as prisoners. They'd have to relocate to the prisons. Before the anchor force and the Sawoms, this end at a point in time held Ghanaians as prisoners. Today, it is an art shop. The center part is the coffee shop of the castle. Now let's see where the governor is.
What's the mode of transportation to here at the fort? How are they getting to?
So I mentioned they would use the flags. There's a communications room. We stand in the communications room, look to a hole, realize a point straight to a fort. So once, probably the way that the sun is really bright, if they saw something that they had to signal the castle, get the rays to hit the mirror for them to get a reflection. So
I mean, transportation. They have to move from here to
the English would be front to the frontiers. So walking through this town was no more of a big deal. And then as we move beyond the door of no return, you would realize the place still bears the name Abrofumpuano. So this space around the castle was mainly for the Europeans, the white, the English in the castle. Now it's still, the beach there is still called Abrofumpuano. The white man's beach. All right, let's see the communications room that the governors. Right, this is the first courtroom of Ghana. Everything in here has been restored as well.
Are you referring to the first European courtroom?
Yeah, most definitely.
Because we had our own
dispute resolution
well.
set up. Yeah, sure. This is the first Western court here. Thanks for the correction. Yes. So this is where our Western court is. Let's look at it.
Oh, Regina.
Regina.
So I believe we can take a guess where we are. Here we have the governor's living room. This is a living room for one person. So in the middle space, I don't know if you're able to count the number of photos on the wall. The first step has a total of 9 photos on the wall. Between 700 2,000 dirhams, share 9 openings on the wall centers lights and ventilation. Count the number of windows you have here. You have 9 big windows. Just the living room. It speaks to the luxury he enjoyed. Let's see his bedroom. here we have the totaling 16. One man was up here enjoying 16 windows. I say it speaks to the public. Was up here having this heaven light feeling. They were down there rotting in hell. They worshipped right on top of them, and the castle itself was built on the god of the natives here. Let's move down to see the stone they built the castle on. So up the hill there, you see another white structure in the bush. That is Fortifications. Where a clear view, just stand here, look to the people. You point straight to the fort there. So a soldier is here picking up signals from that fort. That's Fortifications, up the hill there.
Is it also open to the public?
No, no. William is just 5 minutes walk from here. Alright. Those of things Victoria, just look through the edges. Realize the castle sits on a stone. So that just came up the hill. You see a wide structure up the hill. That is Fortifications.
This is the church.
Yeah.
What was the ranch built? Sorry? The ranch.
You see, some of these cannon guns, the mortars had.
Oh.
Here we have the church. This is the spire hole we saw in the third chamber. So from where this is situated, before you enter the church to pray, you definitely see some, you hear some cries, smell them before you enter to pray. That's why I always ask what kind of God were you going to worship here in the first place. Knowing exactly what was right beneath you. This doubled as a classroom block for the mulattoes. The children born out of the rape were educated here in the church. Today it is used as a children's library, open after school hours for the kids in the community to come read once they are done with school. So around 3:30, getting to 4, we open it for an hour for the kids in the community to come read once they are done with school. Right. Let's move down to see the female slave dungeons, then the door of no return.
I'm sorry.
Let's organize that. Come on, so. And there's. Where we stand is not an entrance, neither is it an exit. So once I give you the chance to see, those who want to see, just stand here, have a quick look, better still just be here, then you come back. If you go too deep, you can fall. I'll tell you what happened, I'll excuse myself, that we take turns to see. So in the fifth chamber, I mentioned that there was an entrance to a tunnel that connected to the door of no return. These are just portions of the underground tunnel. A soldier is stationed here to have a head count to confirm that the numbers moving through the fifth chamber are the same numbers that are walking through to the door of no return. See how that was, they were not going to meet them there. So they had to be stationed at vantage points to be confirming that the same numbers were moving through. Just imagine passing close to 1,000 men through the courtyard. They decided to misbehave, you cannot contain them. So during shipment, they would have to use the tunnel. Please, those who want to see, be careful lest you fall. Just stand here, don't go to you.
It's quite some depth.
Is it deep?
Yeah, very deep.
All right.
At this end, they're climbed out. So this is not as deep as that one. This is where they join them to push them to the door. This end is not as deep as that. So the down ends were storage rooms they kept the goods to be exchanged for. The center part is where the officers and the merchants would be staying. We couldn't see that end because it's undergoing some maintenance work. Now it is a museum, but then unfortunately it's been locked since part of the drainage system. I have to wait for them.
Yeah, I'm not as
Go ahead.
not going to be enough time.
Just want to wait for the last one. The exit point of the tunnel.
Exit?
Yeah.
And where? I know exit. Oh, so they sealed.
Yeah.
Would you continue?
No. There's the initial door of no return.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we have the exit point of the underground tunnel. From the fifth chamber where we saw the shrine is where they would exit from. Sealed 1834, just like the entrance to mark the end of the trade in the castle. Then we have the initial door of no return. So right from this end, the women join from their dungeons. Something very small, the enslaved African have to bend down, passing through this one at a time. This was sealed because the sea sits right behind the castle. The waves were coming in to disrupt business. They'd have to seal this end to relocate the door of no return. Let's see where they took the door of no return. There's a punishment cell for the woman. Female punishment cell. That's where they would urinate and defeat. This is the only source of light and ventilation for the women kept in there, and they were fed once a day through this end. If the women were fed once a day, it means unlike the men, they were not left to die. And why would a woman marry this punishment cell? Those that would resist the rape. If they are taken inside for their abuse, you need to kill them. They are brought in here, locked between 7 to 10 days, fed once a day. So after that time, they still have not allowed themselves. They are given a cannonball, a very small size, 3. Right. About any man here can hold 3 at a time for up to 30 minutes without resting. It is next to impossible. They can carry 3, but for how long can they hold them? A man is ordered to carry these balls if any shape or she is consented to rape. And to say no candidate of rape was ever able to escape the abuse once singled out. Because regardless of what you did, you definitely have the outcome with you. There's a punishment cell for the men that resisted rape. That is where you urinate and rape or punishment is rape. Punishment if it is not allowed. Or punishment is rape. So let's see that, say that. And here we have a female slave woman. They had 2 holding cells for the women. The first one here, second right, opposite us. They kept 150 to 200 women in each. similar conditions to that of the men. Everything was done down there. But I always choose to say to me, treatment for the women was worse compared to the men. See, putting aside the fact that they were raped, women menstruate monthly. And we are kept in here for 4 months, you have to repeat that cycle 4 different times. Picture a lady today in the era of sanitary wear, going heavily in the course of the day, not getting a chance to take a shower at the end of the day. The discomfort she would feel. Then revisit someone held in here the first month, 5 to 7 days in the floor. Second, third, probably a fourth. The cramps that sometimes accompanies menstruation, the infections they will be getting in here, the discomfort felt. That is why, to me, treatment for them was worse. I mentioned around the world they had to clean them first before they abused. They could not stand the stench emanating from them. If women in the castle were abused, definitely some were found pregnant. If you were fortunate, highlight fortunate, to be found pregnant in here, good for you. Because you are taken outside the castle into brick houses they had. They take good care of you until you deliver. You are made to breastfeed the baby for some time. The babies are then taken from you. You are returned to the dungeons to await the next child. These babies were considered theirs. They were kept and educated in the church up on top of the male slave dungeon. I mentioned that they doubled as a classroom block for the mulattoes, the children born out of the rape. They grew to be the aristocrats you had in the sight, the big men then. Some themselves became slave merchants because of what they saw growing up. What then happens to those unfortunate to be found pregnant en route to the Americas? That was your end. Most of them were truly overboard. Who was going to take care of a pregnant slave in that voyage? Who was going to purchase one? They saw no use for you. Compensations. Once the trade was abolished, who were those compensated? Slaves, slave masters. Slave masters were given compensations because they were seen to have lost their businesses. They are taking food from their table, they were compensated. Up until now, we hear calls for reparations. There's this belief there is a great harm done humanity, and that to that effect there should be compensations. Reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, there's still this conception that Africa still suffers the impact of the transatlantic slave trade. Because a chunk of the human population was uprooted from Africa. And for any nation to develop, human resource comes in handy. Just 2 years ago, the president of Ghana joined the call for reparations. But then once he mentioned that, I was of the view that Africans in the diaspora deserve these compensations. The other compensation mark was that these compensations should go to those in the diaspora. But he would argue otherwise, that Africans here also deserve compensations. Because a chunk of the human population was taken from here. Africa could have been better off had it not been the impact of the trade in his view. And that they needed the able-bodied men. What happened to the families they left behind? The children, the old men they left behind. So Africans here deserve something. I was like, fine, split it into two folds, give those in the diaspora first. Because like it or not, they are the direct descendants of the enslaved Africans. The ones we allocated Africans here, in my view, should be directly invested in infrastructure. Those that need roads, give them hospitals, schools, markets, among others. I'm not proud of saying this, but the crop of leadership we have spread across Africa today. Give some of them 5 castles full of money. Some would find ways to misappropriate them, they cannot account for them. Giving certain leaders certain money here is more like enriching a few. Just invest them in things we, the citizens, will benefit from firsthand. Those who